The Philippines was a strategic jewel in the Pacific. It represented more than just territory. It was a testament to American influence in Asia. It was a colonial venture promising eventual self-governance. General Douglas MacArthur's defiant vow, "I shall return," echoed across the world. This forged a powerful commitment to the archipelago's liberation. Yet, in the brutal opening months of 1942, that promise felt like a cruel taunt. Thousands of American and Filipino soldiers were trapped on the Bataan Peninsula. The devastating Japanese aerial attack on Clark Field coincided with the assault on Pearl Harbor. This attack crippled American air superiority. It allowed Imperial forces to advance with terrifying ease. With the Pacific Fleet in ruins, any hope of resupply or reinforcement evaporated. The defenders of Bataan were left isolated. They became a logistical bottleneck without a lifeline. Washington's gaze was fixed firmly on the European theatre. It had effectively written off Bataan. Its beleaguered troops were left to face an impossible fight. The ensuing months brought not a swift defeat. Instead, it was a prolonged, agonizing process of unraveling. Life in pre-war Manila was a country club existence. Officers like Dr. Ralph Emerson Hibbs enjoyed gin and tonics and a manna and siesta ethic. This was now a distant, cruel memory. His optimistic letter home in November 1941 dismissed a Jap attack as unlikely. It now read like an epitaph for innocence lost. On Bataan, the real enemy was not just the Japanese soldier. A more insidious foe emerged: disease and starvation. Soldiers fought on less than 15 ounces of rations a day. They used antiquated equipment. Their bodies began to betray them. They were coursed with every worm and pathogen a hot jungle can visit upon a starved and weakened constitution. They withered away. Field hospitals overflowed. Patients spilled into outdoor wards, set among the gnarled roots of ancient banyan trees. Dengue, dysentery, malaria, typhus, gas gangrene, and beriberi ran rampant. Dr. Hibbs vividly recalled the effects of beriberi. It made legs feel watery and pumping with pains. A heart would thump like a tractor engine bobbed in a swamp. Medics without litters carried the wounded. One blood-smeared boy with protruding grey matter became a terrible mascot of the retreat. Food dwindled to monkey meat, which Dr. Hibbs found difficult to chew. Then it was mule, cats, slugs, rats, dried insects, python, and even dog. The 31st Infantry earned the grim moniker, "Hungry First." Japanese propaganda leaflets were initially clumsy. They sharpened into dark ultimatums. They warned, "Further resistance is completely useless." They commanded, "You dear soldiers, give up your arms and stop resistance at once." Hope, already a scarce commodity, dissolved under the relentless pressure. The chant of the battling bastards of Bataan echoed their profound sense of abandonment. "No mama, no papa, no Uncle Sam," they sang. No aunts, no uncles, no nephews, no nieces, no pills, no planes, no artillery pieces. And nobody gives a damn. Yet even in this despair, soldiers like Lieutenant Henry Lee found the will to write poetry in their foxhole. It was a fragile testament to the human spirit. By April 8, 1942, the situation was catastrophic. General Edward King recognized his command was too starved and diseased to fight. He made the unilateral and courageous decision to surrender. This defied direct orders. He believed, "If I do not surrender to the Japanese, Bataan will be known as the greatest slaughter in history." He chose to rather die 1,000 deaths than see his men annihilated. The night before, the jungle erupted in an apocalyptic display. Troops destroyed their weapons and sabotaged equipment. Millions of dollars worth of explosives detonated. It was the biggest fireworks display I'd ever seen. It was a deliberate self-destruction before the inevitable. On April 9, 1942, King rode under white flags towards the Japanese lines. He was in his last clean uniform. For the soldiers, the moment of surrender was one of profound despair and utter confusion. Edward "Tommy" Thomas, a signal corpsman, had spent the campaign rigging phone lines and foraging for food. He felt a chilling void. The concept of capitulation left him with absolutely no idea what to do, where to go, how to comport himself. It was the largest surrender in American history at that time. It was a moment that shattered the myth of American invincibility. It exposed the brutal realities of abandonment and inadequate support. The unspoken taboo of surrender, never planned for, had become a grim reality. The fall of Patain was a stark illustration of consumption without replenishment. It was a heroic struggle to prolong a hopeless cause. Defeat came in mean little doses. It was a defeat that would lead to unimaginable suffering for the doomed POWs and fate-fucked men. This was under a Japanese military code that deemed death preferable to the shame of imprisonment. The white flags of surrender had barely been unfurled on April 1942. The Japanese command, under General Masaharu Honma, initiated a catastrophic evacuation plan. It was for the defeated Allied forces. Honma was under intense pressure from Tokyo to swiftly clear the Bataan Peninsula. This was for the impending assault on Corregidor. He saw the American and Filipino prisoners as little more than human debris to be removed. Yet his officers' scheme was radically out of step with the circumstances on the ground. Japanese intelligence was fatally flawed. It had drastically underestimated the sheer number of prisoners by tens of thousands. It utterly failed to grasp their emaciated, disease-ridden condition. The expectation that these skeletal men could endure a forced march of Imperial Army standards was a cruel delusion. Could they truly march 25 to 30 miles a day? This profound miscalculation, coupled with a rigid military culture resistant to mid-course corrections, it was exacerbated by escalating racial hatred fanned by figures like Colonel Masanobu Tsuji. This transformed the planned evacuation into a brutal ordeal. What began as a logistical nightmare quickly devolved into a horrifying 75-mile trek north. It was a hike that would forever be etched in history as the Bataan Death March. The road itself became a river of suffering. Columns of starving, diseased men, their bodies already ravaged by months of combat and deprivation, were forced to march. They marched under the relentless tropical sun. The staggering logistics of moving tens of thousands on foot were surpassed only by the staggering carnage. Along the route, death was a constant, visible companion. A median estimate suggests a corpse was encountered every 20 yards. This was a stark testament to the sheer scale of the atrocity. The air hung heavy with the smell of sweat, fear, and decay. It was a grim perfume that clung to every mile. This was not a single grand act of slaughter. It was a continuous piecemeal atrocity. It was born of chaos, logistical failure, and a seething racial hatred that dehumanized the prisoners in the eyes of their captors. After weeks of this harrowing journey, the final leg of the march funneled the survivors into San Fernando here. They were crammed into sun-baked boxcars. Sometimes 100 men were forced into each rolling cell. They became coffins on wheels. Unventilated and stifling, the vaporous heat inside felt like a kiln. The air was thick with the stench of body odors, gangrenous wounds, and blood mucus diarrhea. This splattered the plywood floor. With a long, hideous screech, the rusty doors slid shut. This plunged the men into stifling darkness and a new dimension of torment. Many felt driven by something outside themselves to simply endure. The ungainly evacuation took more than 3 weeks to accomplish. It was a period of unimaginable suffering that shattered the myth of American invincibility. Was it a premeditated act of mass murder? No, it was a catastrophic outcome of a fatally flawed plan. It was compounded by chaos, logistical failures, and seething racial hatred. It proved far more deadly than any single battle. For the survivors, the journey culminated in arrival at Camp O'Donnell. Historians aptly described it as the Andersonville of the Pacific. This was no liberation. It was a transition from the battlefield's acute hardships to a systematic, institutionalized regimen of deprivation and death. Here, a new and brutal reality was established for the American prisoners of war. The fight for survival shifted from the open road to the confines of a camp. It was a camp designed to slowly extinguish hope and life. Cabanatuan was the largest continuously operating American prisoner of war camp on foreign soil. Despite its superficial promise of improvement over O'Donnell, it settled into a grim routine. It was a routine of malign neglect and slave labor. For years, survival within its confines depended less on communal ideals. It relied more on a desperate individualistic ingenuity. Men battled extreme starvation and a litany of diseases. These diseases turned bodies into pathological museums. They also battled the relentless psychological toll of captivity. They clung to fragile bonds and honed their wits against the slow erosion of hope. But as 1944 bled into 1945, a new, chilling directive cast an even darker shadow. It was the August One Kill All order. This was formally issued by the Japanese War Ministry. This was no rogue act by a sadistic guard. It was a calculated policy. As Allied forces advanced across the Pacific, Tokyo became keenly aware of the atrocities committed in their prison camps. They issued the order to annihilate prisoners in dire situations. The directive was a cold, explicit command. It was to eliminate all evidence and all witnesses. It ensured that no American prisoner would ever live to testify to the horrors they had endured. It was a final, desperate act of concealment. It was the ultimate expression of a military code that deemed death preferable to the shame of imprisonment. This chilling policy fueled the growing irrationality and brutality of the Japanese forces. They became most vicious when backed into a corner. Dr. Hibbs and Dr. Musselman witnessed this firsthand. They attempted to save a gravely wounded enemy soldier, only for a Japanese officer to callously insist on moving the critically injured man. They estimated he wouldn't last half a kilometer. This casual disregard for life, even their own, underscored the escalating desperation that permeated the captors' ranks. Within Cabanatuan, the dire pessimism of captivity was now compounded by an intense, visceral fear. It was the fear of this impending liquidation. Rumors of an imminent massacre circulated like a fever. These included the digging of a large burial trench and plans for machine gun executions. Bob Body, a prisoner, had witnessed the Japanese moving perhaps 100 trucks and more carabao carts and calyces to the mountains. He became convinced they were all about to be killed. He felt he had gone as far as I could go. Sometime during the last week of January, Body, along with 2 Confederates, hatched a desperate escape plan. They intended to break out on Tuesday, January 30, at 8:30 that night. His determination was absolute. He would get through the fence, one way or the other. Yet, even as the shadow of extermination loomed, the very forces driving the Japanese to such extremes also brought paradoxical glimmers of hope. One night, Tommy Thomas, responsible for perimeter security, observed a twin-tailed contraption flying overhead. It was an advanced American aircraft. It was sleeker than any plane Thomas had seen before. This sci-fi lozenge was described as a Buck Rogers come to life. Some called it a black barn swallow, or even an angel of death. It was an eerie emblem of how far American technology had evolved since their primitive metals in death. Its sleek, powerful form was a stark contrast to the dilapidated camp and its starving inhabitants. It symbolized a new country, a new era, and the undeniable approach of liberation. This was even as the August One Kill All order threatened to extinguish all chances of seeing it. As the war relentlessly turned against Japan, Allied air and sea superiority transformed the vast Pacific. It became a gauntlet of death for Japanese shipping. The desperate decision was made to transport healthy American prisoners to Japan for forced labor. This meant cramming thousands of men into the holds of cargo vessels. These ships would become infamously known as hell ships. These journeys were a horrifying testament to systemic disregard for prisoner welfare. Men were subjected to inhumane conditions. Often, there was the grim irony of Allied bombing. The harrowing voyage of the Oryoku Maru was one brutal example. American planes mistakenly attacked their own men. This highlighted the perilous gamble these prisoners faced. It showed how the enemy was not always clearly defined. Allied forces themselves inadvertently became instruments of death for their own men. But if the hell ships represented a chaotic, often accidental slaughter born of war's fog, the events at Porta Princesa prison camp on Palawan were different. They were a deliberate, calculated act of extermination. By December 14, 1944, the tide of war had undeniably shifted. American forces were closing in. A convoy of destroyers and battleships was spotted that very morning. Japanese Lieutenant Sato, known chillingly to the prisoners as the Buzzard, knew the game was up. His mission under the chilling August One Kill All order that reverberated across the Pacific was clear. It was to annihilate all witnesses, all evidence. The day began like any other. It started with a meager breakfast of weevilly rice. This was followed by the relentless, back-breaking work of hammering brain coral into bone-white flour. It was for a 2,200-meter airstrip they had toiled on for 1,000 naked days. Around 1 p.m., the first of 3 air raid alarms wailed. But Sato's increasingly frantic cries of hundreds of planes, hurry, struck the prisoners as suspicious. Navy signalman C.C. Smith refused to enter the primitive air raid shelters. These were narrow slits dug 4 feet deep and roofed with logs. For his defiance, a Japanese saber cleaved through his head. His life ended in an instant. Dr. Carl Mango, another prisoner, vainly pleaded, "Show some reason, please, God, show reason." He, too, was cut down. Once the POWs were trapped inside the poorly ventilated trenches, Japanese soldiers brought 5-gallon buckets of high-octane aviation fuel. The trenches were designed to hold about 50 men each. The overwhelming smell of gas, thick and suffocating, seeped into the stifling dankness below. Then lighted bamboo torches were tossed into the trenches. They instantly transformed them into infernos. Flames shot through the shelters. The smell of singed hair and roasting flesh filled the air. Some men moaned, others struggled. In a final desperate act of vengeance, one prisoner managed a death embrace. This succeeded in setting the surprised executioner on fire. As men burst from the burning trenches, their bodies alight, they were systematically hunted down. Squads of soldiers combed the area. They plunged bayonets into the weeds, ensuring no one escaped. On the coral beach, survivors were shot and bayoneted. They were often left to suffer slow, agonizing deaths. Irving Evans, facing his executioners, defiantly challenged them. "All right, you bastards, here I am and don't miss," he said. James Stidham, a paralyzed powered BOD who had been spoon-fed by a comrade, was shot in the face. A Japanese diary entry from that day grimly noted the executed prisoners are floating and rolling among the breakwaters. It described numerous corpses, and the smell is unbearable. The Japanese even reignited the trenches. This created an immense pall of smoke curling from the 3 subterranean pyres. Amidst this horror, a few men discovered a miraculous natural escape hatch. It was a small fissure in one trench wall, leading to a shallow ledge. They had previously concealed it with sandbags. Eugene Nielsen, captured in May 1942, was among those who found this subterranean accident. Realizing this was it, either I had to break for it or die, he squeezed through. He suffered bullet wounds to his armpit, ribs, left thigh, and temple as he emerged into the nightmare above ground. Nielsen, along with Albert Pacheco and Edwin Petrie, hid in a coral cave. They endured the crabs. That ate on us pretty good down there. They also faced the constant threat of bayonet searches. Marine J.O. Warren is believed to have sacrificed himself. He drew fire to protect other hiding men. As evening approached and the Japanese soldiers left to eat, Nielsen began his desperate swim across Puerto Princesa Bay. For 9 hours he navigated the 5-mile expanse. He used a large coconut husk for support. Shots hit the water around him. This forced him to swim underwater as far as he could. His skin was lacerated by coral and his body ravaged by disease and starvation. Reaching the distant mangrove swamp, he was found naked by a Filipino man. His hide was rubbing off when he brushed against anything, the man observed. He cryptically told Nielsen, "You have friends here." Nielsen was reunited with 7 other survivors, including Pacheco and Petrie, who had also escaped. On January 6, 1945, Nielsen and 5 other survivors were evacuated to Morotai. The next day, his debriefing by Captain Ickes brought the atrocity to light. "I think I am the only one alive from the Palawan prison camp," Nielsen stated. His voice was a raw testament to what he had witnessed. "I want you to write to the War Department to tell them about the Japanese massacre of the Americans at Puerto Princesa. This deliberate, brutal act of extermination resulted in the deaths of 150 American POWs. Only 11 known survivors remained. It provided crucial testimony for subsequent war crimes investigations. It ensured that the horrors of Puerto Princesa would not be buried with its victims. The crackle and thunder of the firefight that had ripped through Cabanatuan camp died down. It left a ringing silence in its wake. American Rangers, their weapons still hot, moved through the bullet-shoed barracks. They called out, "We're Yanks! You're free." Yet, for the emaciated prisoners, the sudden liberation was a shock as profound as their captivity. They were reduced to sickly old birds that had just been plucked. Their minds were scarred by years of pessimism. Many were plagued by night blindness and the psychological toll of endless terror. They reacted with catatonic ecstasy. Their first instinct was not joy, but disbelief. "I thought we'd been forgotten," one whispered. It was a stark testament to the despair that had festered within. The long life march to safety had begun in the chaos of that night. It was a ghastly parade of men. Some were walking skeletons, barely able to stand. They hobbled on homemade sandals or were carried on the backs of their liberators. It was a journey fraught with lingering dangers. These ranged from Japanese mortar fire to the treacherous crossing of the Rizal Road. But each step was a defiant reclaiming of freedom. The weary rangers, fueled by amphetamines and an unshakable resolve, guided their precious cargo. They moved through the darkness, across rivers, and past lurking enemy patrols. Slowly, agonizingly, the gaunt figures of the ghost soldiers began to transform. Their sunken eyes found a spark of hope with each passing mile. Each P-51 fighter plane waggled its wings in welcome. Each ambulance appeared on the horizon. The arduous trek culminated in a profound emotional and physical recovery. It was a gradual reawakening of bodies and spirits long dormant. Then, on a cold, thick morning in March, exactly 12 minutes past 10 o'clock, the USS General Anderson nosed into San Francisco Bay. A dense scrim of fog, as if on cue, lifted dramatically. It revealed the majestic Golden Gate Bridge in a flash of gleaming metal. The Marin headlands were clothed in soft green. It was a tableau of homecoming so perfect, so poignant, it felt scripted. Thousands lined the bridge and docks. They appeared as tiny human specks waving handkerchiefs. Their numbers swelled into an overwhelming tide of welcome. A banner on the rail of a nearby vessel declared, "God bless you, Expos," as a brass band played the defiant anthem, "Don't fence me in." There wasn't a dry eye on that ship. San Francisco erupted in a tornado of sound. Air raid sirens keened. Church bells rang. Foghorns blared, and factory whistles shrieked. Navy dirigibles floated overhead. Fireboats spouted contrails of froth. Squadrons of fighter planes swooped in a thunderous aerial salute. Odd trinkets, flowers, money, tickets, and even lingerie rained down from the crowds. It was a chaotic, heartfelt outpouring of national embrace. A 75-foot welcome home greeting adorned a water taxi. It was a vivid symbol of the nation's profound relief and gratitude. The disoriented, dull-eyed prisoners were met with overwhelming public adulation. It was a powerful counter-narrative to the years of feeling abandoned. President Roosevelt's letter welcomed them. It acknowledged their valiant fight and suffering. It wished them happiness and health. War photographer Carl Maidens, capturing the scene, declared, "It is now American history," he added. "A prouder story has not been written. The rescue of the ghost soldiers and their triumphant return became a pivotal moment of redemption." It silenced the whispers of no mama, no papa, no Uncle Sam, and nobody gives a damn. It offered a powerful counter-narrative to the shame many veterans felt as walking exhibits of American defeat. It proved unequivocally that Americans very much gave a damn. This daring raid on Cabanatuan was a testament to extraordinary American encouragement. It was a symbol of the enduring human spirit against overwhelming odds. It ensured that the epic story of these men, their suffering, and their liberation would not be forgotten.